The layout. We have 3 panel sessions, 12 experts in total from a number of different backgrounds, bringing in expertise in a bid to move the conversation as far as youth sport and making it safer and enhancing that youth sport experience is concerned. We also have a one-on-one interview a little later on with Lisa McLeod, MPP from Nepean Carleton, and we're going to talk about Rowan's Law. And many of you who are in the room know about the law, but we also want to make sure we share that with our audience via Facebook Live. And then we also, if technology allows, we're going to connect via Skype with Thomas Dimitrov, who is the GM of the Atlanta Falcons, and a guy who has a great vision as far as moving the ball forward regarding not just professional athletics and how his athletes are and their return to play protocol is concerned, but also how it connects to youth sport, because oftentimes what the pros do, the amateur sports will do as well. So we have that. We'll also connect with a former Ottawa Rough Rider trainer and now the director of sports medicine with the Falcons. That's Marty Lozon as well. So we have a lot to take care of today. And with that said, let's begin panel number 1. Are you ready? All right, here we go. Panel number 1. Angela Goran is a Canadian Olympic rowing champion, founder of Sock Jock, champion campaign of youth and community projects in advocating youth sports, awfully important to her. She's also a competitive triathlete and a cyclist. So please welcome Angela Goran. Glen McCurdie is a VP of Hockey Canada. He's been involved in amateur hockey. This will be coming up to your 30th year.
That's true.
That's true.
A long time.
So you would have watched me playing football at the same time as Jed's grandfather. They specialized in IT, travel insurance, risk management for Hockey Canada, and really, at the end of the day, as technical as the title is, it's about making sure he creates a safer and healthy environment for young people, boys and girls who take up the game of ice hockey. And we're very passionate about that, and we're going to touch base on that as well. So thank you, Glen, for being here.
Thank you.
No applause for Glen?
Glen.
Kate Pace Lindsey, you have to have a unique sense of courage to put on a tight suit, stand on 2 paddles, and race down a mountain somewhere in Europe and become the best in the world. And that's what she certainly has done. Many of you know her from her skiing portfolio, 1993 FIS World Alpine Ski Champion, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
3-time Olympian, Canadian Female Athlete of the Year, and VP of Lindsey Sports Therapy. Kate Pace Lindsey.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
Nathan Lafeyette, NHL alumni, drafted by the St. Louis Blues. He's a member of the Vancouver Canucks and the Rangers and the Kings. And he has a very unique story that we're going to touch base on as soon as we get going, because he's been that athlete who's been challenged to come back from injury, significant injury, at a time when we didn't know a whole lot about that injury, and that was concussions. So we're going to touch base on that and much more. Each session is about 30 minutes, but it's also going to include a Q&A. And so if you have any thoughts you want to share or discuss with our panel, by all means, you're certainly invited. So let's go to question number 1. Are you ready? Return to play protocol. It's awfully important as far as youth sport is concerned. How does it differ today, Angela Goran, than it did, say, when you were a competitive rower at UVic, and how you had to sort of journey through that experience as an athlete when there really wasn't that mental health coach, there wasn't that support system available to you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we've talked about that before when we were meeting a couple weeks ago over the phone. Definitely, you know, in 1997 was when I graduated high school, and a good experience was coming from coaching where you had that application in high school, you had hands-on experience, somebody that really cared for you. But going into that university program and the national team, what I found that was really difficult was the fact that there wasn't the sports psychology, there wasn't the sports medicine. It was something that was being discussed. There was not also the career development. So it's been really interesting from the late 90s and the early 2000s where they were starting to address that aside from being an athlete, there was an after point of when you finished athleticism. And I think that was I guess the effect that it had was seen at that stage, you know, in 2004 when things kind of moved on. I graduated university at the same time. It was a big impact in my life to kind of go, and I saw it with friends that were also at the same stage where they didn't know exactly what that next move was, and they didn't have that support. Now that's changed, and that's something that, you know, I'm glad to see that they've made a really big address with messaging, you know, what do we do in that next stage.
Glen, I know that's a priority for Hockey Canada because return to play is awfully important. And When was there a tangible shift where that became a higher priority for Hockey Canada and for you in your position?
I think for us, it's always been a priority nationally. Our issue in being a volunteer-run organization is to get that message down locally. And I think from our perspective, the kind of evolution or the awareness of concussion protocol, for example, has elevated that to a stage where it's a lot better for us. The awareness is far more key. We have issues, obviously, with return to play with our coaches and trainers and parents and players, all trying to rush people back, possibly all with good motives in mind. But the awareness component for us gets a message out there that I don't think we could on our own. So I think from that perspective, that's been very good for us, and has elevated that return to play protocol to a front of mind as opposed to back of mind.
Okay, Pace, Lindsey, you've been there as an elite athlete, and the whole idea of getting back on the mountain as fast as you could was always a priority. And maybe oftentimes that old school type of thinking was hindered the progress of the return to play. But now in your position as VP with Lindsey Sports Therapy, your perspective has changed. And is it patience? Is it about collaboration?
I think the thing that's most important is looking at each athlete, each individual differently, depending on how they got hurt or what sport they're involved in and the dangers that they're going to face when they go back to their sport. I think each individual needs to be addressed in terms of what's required for them to get back onto the field. I know in my own sport, we did actually have a lot of support. We did have sports psychologists. We did have a great medical staff. And so, I think at that sport, you didn't want to return athletes too quickly on the mountain because the risk of injury is very high at that speed. So I think having good support, good medical staff around you is very important for every athlete.
For the medical staff, though, back in the day, Nathan, what they knew then versus what we know today, significantly, there's a contrast there. Let's talk about your background in hockey and your injury, 2 injuries in one game, and how that changed for you.
Yeah, you know what, I'll give you a couple of examples. In the 90s, I saw it change a lot. And I think that the culture, the mentality, the controls around return to play in 1993 when I started, it had moved a lot in 1999 when I finished. And I remember early in my career, I broke my sternum, and it wasn't a fun injury. But it was, the return to play was up to the player. You'd meet the coach, and the coach would say, hey, can you go? You'd say, well, I'll try it in practice. You'd go on, you'd see what you could do, and if you could go, you'd tell the coach, yeah, I can go. And guess what? I was a horrible player with a broken sternum. It didn't work. And then later, when I started to get into concussion injuries, it was still maybe up to the player a little bit, but the medical staff was starting to exert their controls. And to this day, I thank Dr. Melman with the Kings, who, I thought it was going to work the old way, where I said, yeah, I'm good to go, let me go. And he's like, no, you're not going, you're not ready. And I thank him to this day, because it helped me avoid a potential worse injury.
How do we change the way we think about injuries? Because we could say, if we live in a utopian state, if a child is hurt or an athlete's hurt, we're going to do everything we can to make sure they rehab and get back to 100% physically and mentally. But we know in the midst of competition, the emotion will take over, and it has a tendency to alter the decision-making process. How do we avoid that kind of thinking where you ask an athlete, hey, Nate, are you hurt or are you injured? Now, unless you have a medical degree or unless you study kin, you have no idea, but the question is, when can you get back in there to compete for us? And oftentimes the athlete jumps into the fray too early. How do you change that thinking? Angela?
Oh gosh, that's a hard question, because I can honestly tell you, I remember going back, Dr. Brodesky would have been my medical doctor, and I always remember going into treatment, and half the time he goes, I can give you the prescription, I can tell you not to go back, but honestly, I know you're going to walk through that door and probably go right to the gym. And that was that athlete mentality. I think you always had that when you got to a certain level. Obviously, you had to listen to yourself, but I think surrounding yourself with the right, it's great to hear, Lisa, that you were saying there were, in this case, you had medical around you. Maybe that definitely comes down to the different NSOs or the sports, having the different funding in place to actually have that. At the time, Rowing Canada, they didn't. UVic did, so it was nice to be able to have both. But yeah, I think it really comes down to surrounding yourself with the right people and really relying on the fact of listening to your coach and building that trust with the athlete to know that recovery is just equally as important, because oftentimes I think that often isn't what is addressed. It's usually get back in. You got to be training. If you miss that practice, you miss that one workout, there's somebody else out there doing that training. That means you're down a workout, so you're not advancing.
Huge difference though for both you and Kate and Nate as elite athletes. But what about that pee-wee football young hockey player who's feeling the pressure, not just from the coach competitively, but also from his peers in the room, because all of a sudden the other teammates don't know what the injury is or the hurt. Just go out there and play. Do you have to almost go back in time and try to re-coach the coaches and sell the collaborative nature to force accountability?
Yeah, and Ken, I'm not sure I've got the precise answer for you. What I can tell you is it's a critical issue for us, and if you look at putting your son or daughter into a sport, any sport, safety is a key issue for that. We're looking at declining enrollment in our sport, especially in male hockey, and I think that's the main reason why. We've got 4 or 5 reasons that we can consider to be barriers to sport, and certainly safety is one of them. And for us, no different than football or rugby or soccer. All sports have some injury component to them, but that message for us is very critical because we're beginning to lose a membership base, particularly on the male side. We're offsetting that a little bit with an increase in female participation, which is primarily due to, I would say, our women's Olympic team and the interest in female sports. But that message is really key for us, and I think how we get that out is critical to our long-term as a sport organizing body, like a national sport organization. And I simply go back to what I said earlier. I think that's an awareness thing for us, and we have to recognize that probably 90 to 93% of our members are recreational in nature. It's not about winning. It's about having some fun as kids, and moms and dads just want to put their kids in a safe environment, and that's it.
Is that the message though, to remind everybody involved that it is a game as for example, in hockey, as passionate as we are about the game, because it represents so much of what we are globally. You have to remind yourself that at the end of the day, unless you're getting paid $4.5 million a year, it's still just a game, right?
I was thinking about your earlier question about timing. I know for our sport, I mean, the Olympics only comes once every 4 years. The World Championships only comes once every 2 years. So, I remember facing a major injury in 1993 just before the World Championships, and it was like I wanted to be a participant in the World Championships. I'd prepared for it for so many years, and I suffered a major injury just 2 weeks before. So I wasn't going to let that major injury stop me from competing in the World Championships. So I just went ahead and did it anyways. Found a way to make it work. I mean, I had broken my arm, and it was like, let's just get it in a cast, and let's just get a ski pole attached to that cast, and let's just keep moving forward. So in that instance, I had to make the decision. I had to weigh the missing the World Championships or competing with a broken arm. And you just, as the athlete, I was the one who was able to make the decision. Even though the coaches said it's dangerous, it's this, it's that. It's like, but I'm going to miss the World Championships and I'm going to do it anyway. So I think, sometimes it's the athlete who has to make this decision. Sometimes it's the coach.
They have to accept that risk.
Exactly, accept the risk.
But then you get into the gate, and there's that moment where you've convinced yourself physically you can go, but is there that moment where you go, what am I doing?
It actually didn't happen to me.
It happened to me.
Another example of the crazy Canucks.
I was crazy enough to just say, no, you know what, I want to do this. And it paid off. I won the World Championships that day. So, I was fortunate in the way it all worked out. We had a major weather delays, and I was able to work on a one-arm start, and it worked out. But I'm not saying it would work out every time, but it happened to work out that time, and I was glad I made the decision.
Nate, you've been there as an athlete, and maybe not so much the pros, but maybe in junior, where all of a sudden you're a 16-year-old, 17-year-old playing for the Cornwall Royals, and you want to get drafted. And scouts are at games, and that whole idea of, I got to go. I may not be 100%, and you're at an age of 16, 17 where emotionally you can't make that decision on your own, but you convince yourself you can.
Yeah, you justify playing, and that's, it can't be left up to the player. And I think there's certain stages in your career too where you don't want to be labeled as damaged goods. And certain injuries, back maybe in the 80s and 90s, knee injuries in football, you became damaged goods. Now they can reconstruct your knee and it's not a big issue. And concussion kind of has gone through a bit of that. And I think just 20 years from now there'll be some other injury that might get you labeled. But I think with the discussion on return to play, there's an important stakeholder that's often forgotten, and that's the parent. And parents generally like to download that responsibility onto an organization or a coaching staff or some other stakeholder, but the parent knows their child better than anybody. And if you see them limping, that's an issue. If they're cranky and out of sorts, then that's an issue maybe with concussion. And too often they just want to wash their hands of the responsibility of knowing what's going on with their child.
And put a trust into a coach. And let's face it, if you've coached, and there are many of you in the room, and I coach tyke football, all of a sudden you have a bunch of kids, and you're just trying to get the right kids on the field at the right time. You oftentimes don't see little Johnny with a limp, but mom and dad will, and I guess the ability to take that control back. And I imagine that's part of that collaborative, Glen, for Hockey Canada and all sports, whereas it starts with the parent, and that communication is so important.
No question. And we all four of those persons have an impact on whether or not that son or daughter continues to play. I've seen it even just recently where a friend of mine, her son was involved in something off ice, and 16, I think he's a 17-year-old, and he wanted to play for a number of reasons, and the mother said, no, I don't think you're good to go, and he said, no, I'm just playing. That's exactly what I'm doing. But since then, he's had a visit with the team trainer, and there's other factors that come into play. I would suggest a few years ago that would not have happened. Whereas now that even the mother being as concerned as she was, knowing some of the background helps out, and being able to impart and have that conversation with the coach and the trainer helps out as well. And then it kind of removes the player from making that decision on his or her own, which is ideal for us.
For all my athletes on the panel right now, in hindsight. Actually, I want to phrase the question a little differently. You have children, okay, and when and if you have children, how do you go about the return to play protocol? Are you more active, or are you still kind of captured by that old school where sometimes you need to find your way through it, the issue, and so let's go from that perspective.
I would be proactive. I don't have children as of yet, but I definitely, with Sock Jock, I feel like I have thousands of them with over 10,000 schools and lots of teens. And I've been fortunate enough to have an indoor cycling studio where I've been a coach. I've been in that position. And I think it's really important at this stage to, like players' health, moving into that stage of technology and gamifying it. So it makes the ability to have a lot of fun with getting to know what your children are doing, as well as the coach to have that way of actually managing what's going on in going back if they're injured. So it also makes it communicative, because let's face it, like teenagers, they don't like talking to their parents. So oftentimes, well, at least when I was a coach, I would be in the locker room sitting in the bathroom most of the time, and the girls would be changing, and I always would laugh because I'd listen to the conversation. I'd come out and they'd go, "You're there," and I'd be like, "Oh wow, we got to talk when we're spinning today." Because obviously they weren't downloading and talking to their parents about what was going on, not just physically, but also mentally. So there's a lot of different things. So, yeah.
Kate?
One of the things we do, I work closely, obviously, with my husband, who's a chiropractor and therapist. He's actually works closely with Dr. Cook, who's on the third panel today. So he, one of the things that we do with a lot of the athletes that we work with is sort of take them into an environment from, not just injury right back to play, is taking them into an environment where they can sort of test some of the skills that they use on the playing field. So either put them in an environment like in a pool or in a gym and do things at a slower pace to see how they react, and then make a decision from there, how well they do, how well they respond, and then slowly graduate them back up into their field, whether it's on ice or in football or whatever sport that they're playing. So just take a slower approach back. Not necessarily go from 0 to 100, but sort of gradually move them towards playing again.
And Nate, that would kill two birds with one stone, because you're getting the physical rehab, but you're also getting the mental that pairs up with that. But
yeah, I'm my life after hockey has been in the insurance industry and underwriting, accident business, youth sports, things like that. And I'm overly cautious. My kids think that I'm so like, what happened to you? It's like, and I'm extremely cautious. I see the data. I see what happens when people come back too early. I see the second hit syndrome. I see the second injury, and I'm overly cautious, and I know that, and I tell my kids that. My daughter broke her leg doing gymnastics, and she wanted to. When the X-ray came back, the doctor said, "It's broken. We're going to put a cast on. I'll be right back." And as soon as he left the room, she said, "Okay, let's get out of here." It's like, no, you got to get the cast on. And so for her, it was about how to control that return to participation. So she did upper body exercises for about a month while her leg healed, and then she slowly got back onto putting weight on it.
The kids watched you on YouTube. Have they gone to YouTube and watched you?
You can't hide on YouTube. There's nowhere to hide. Yeah, they've. It's funny. My kids didn't really know that I played hockey. They were born after my career, and I think one of their friends told them I played, and that's kind of how they put. Because they knew I played hockey, but they just didn't connect the dots that it was professional hockey on TV in the NHL. And they're like, "What? Wait, what?"
and if there's any Vancouver Canuck fans,
Yeah.
And we were talking about this earlier, in Game 7 against the Rangers, I think that was in '94 in the finals, and you hit the goalpost.
Yes, I did.
And
I did.
That's I imagine everywhere you go, people, hey, I remember you, especially in Vancouver.
Yeah, it's, I mean, Vancouver's passionate, Canada's passionate about its hockey.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's just the fact that I've moved on from my hockey career and I'm in insurance now. I look at myself as an insurance guy that used to play hockey. And I think that's why my kids never really connected the dots until they were a little bit older. But I've moved on. I hope that the Vancouver Canucks faithful has moved on.
Until they win it.
Nobody here, right? We're okay?
Until they win the cup, they're not going to let it go. We're going to close up soon, but so I want to open the floor to questions for our panel. But before I do, I got one more question. That is the idea of data collection. The only way we can change minds is to have documented proof that there's another way to go. I imagine with Hockey Canada you do that, and I imagine that's all part of everything that you do, and you need sort of the answers to the questions before you get into an argument with someone to get them to change their ways. Glenn, is that?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, we first of all we run what we call our Hockey Canada registry. So we actually register all players in a centralized database, compile that over a number of years. On the insurance front, we self-insure our medical dental insurance, so we do that all in-house. We cut our own checks, that kind of thing. So obviously we've got data that we rely upon in terms of how we adjust our rates on an annual basis. Obviously we can identify injury trends, and we do that. Our issue is that we are a supplemental insurance in Canada. That's what we do, and unfortunately we don't see all the claims that may come our way. We may have, somebody may have great health insurance that they rely upon, and we never see the accident. If there's no expenses that are incurred as a result of that aren't being picked up somewhere else, or none in total, then we may not see that accident. So our data is, is probably as good as we have in Canada with respect to hockey, outside of hospital retained data, but it's not where it could be, and there's certainly area for improvement there, no question.
Any questions from the audience? Because I have one more question, but I want to give you guys the floor as well, just in case you have something. Because I have, we got a mic for you, Neil?
Thanks, Ken. Question for Nathan, and I'm just trying to visualize and maybe even sense what it must be like to be concussed and still practicing and playing a game. Like, what is your sense of reality in those moments, if you can reflect back to those significant traumas?
I mean, I don't know how much time I have, but
thanks.
When you are at your best as a professional athlete, I mean, this is my experience as a hockey player, and even now when I play golf or even playing ping pong with my son, the game slows down, and you just know what is happening in advance of it happening. And when you are concussed, it is the exact opposite. You are constantly trying to catch up to what's going on around you. And your arms work, your legs work, your lungs, your heart rate's not elevated, your muscles are strong, but the game is ahead of you. And it's a helpless feeling. You can skate down the wing and stay out of people's way, but when it comes to actually making plays and anticipating where you need to be, it becomes difficult. And I had, one of the low points of my career from a concussion standpoint is I got hit in a playoff game. And I didn't see the guy that hit me, didn't see it happening. I didn't get knocked out. So it's, concussion, the definition of concussion in the early 90s was, did you get knocked out? And I didn't, and I wasn't getting knocked out. I was just losing my wherewithal on the ice, if you will. And I went down on one knee. You process it. You're like, whew, that was a good hit. And it's like, okay, I better get off. So I went, the two benches are there. I looked up, I saw the Quebec Nordiques, and I was like, well, that's not me. And I looked over, and I saw the New York Rangers, and I was like, well, isn't that interesting? neither one of those teams is me.
50-50 on that one. You got to be right somewhere.
Yeah, you know, and I've seen the game footage since, and you can see me in the middle of the ice. The game's going on around me. I'm on one knee, and my head's just going like this, confused that there's two teams that I don't play for. Yeah, and then finally, I had the wherewithal to look down and see what uniform I was wearing, and I went to the Rangers bench, and that was kind of the low point for me, where I was like, you know what, I'm really not that good when I'm concussed, and. But then you have to deal with, well, when do you come back? When are you okay?
And that's the mystery.
It's hard to figure out on your own.
And that's the mystery, right? Because we don't know. Because we have this conversation with Jed Tommy earlier. An offensive lineman in football can run into each other all game and not have an issue as far as concussion is concerned. But then a receiver across the middle, happened to me going against BC Lions. I went across the middle, and I turned after I caught a ball, and I looked, and all I remember, the guy had brown eyes. And when I woke up on the turf, and I had Mark Aubry looking down at me, and I said, what happened? He says, you got hit. I said, you went to med school to figure that one out? Broke my nose, teeth through my lip, dislocated shoulder. But you know what? I got back to practice that week and got ready to go. And because the whole idea of, do you feel okay? And even if I didn't, I said, yeah. Because that competitor in me, because I'd look to the sidelines, I looked to my teammates, and, hey, we need you. And that puts you in tough spots sometimes. Yeah. What would you like to see change in youth sport moving forward? I'll ask all four of you, and I'll start with Angela.
Oh, gosh. I think the biggest thing I want to see is more involvement on all aspects, from the youth to the families, the actual communication. I think we've lost that disservice to the fact that sport is about play, especially from a younger standpoint. Be more active in our schools at even a younger age, not just high school. It's getting sport back into it at that stage where we actually have the funding to put towards the sport development, the education around it, and the support for the families. Because I think, talking about the parents earlier, that's really a missing piece. I think a lot of parents do actually put the onus on coaches to act as the parent the minute they drop them off, like childcare. Right. So I think there's something to be said about, if we can use technology as a positive and create a communication basis to bring us more together and get people involved with that understanding, fantastic, especially for our kids.
Now, Glen, I'm sure Hockey Canada has a vision.
Yeah, I'm not sure it'd be the same as mine, but if we have a vision. I would say basically the same as Angela. I would say, putting that in a hockey perspective specifically, I think we're fortunate in this country with our sport that people are so passionate about it. And I'm sure other sports look at us with envy sometimes with the amount of things that are newsworthy with respect to hockey. But unfortunately, that's based on everybody thinking that they're an expert in the sport, and that transcends right onto the bench for us. It transcends to every parent that's in the stands. They all know better. And as a result, you've got so many experts in an arena at all times. I'd like to transform that, or I'd like to see us transform that passion into more of a participation-based passion where hey, it's just youth sports. These kids are out there having fun. Let's just pour our passion into that. And if something good comes out of it down the road, then so be it. But in the meantime, let's just make sure we're providing a healthy and safe environment for those kids. And all those kids are enjoying, what can be a lifelong sport. I think that's where we want to get to.
Kate.
I think this falls in line with what the other panels have said, is not specializing so much at a young age. I mean, just learning to play a lot of different sports and getting exposed to a lot of different things. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be sport, it can be activity. So just getting kids not streamlined at the age of 5 or 6 or 7, but just allowing them to play for a number of years. And, they may have several sports that they're very passionate about, but just exposing them to a lot more.
Nate.
Yeah, I'll first maybe start by saying Hockey Canada and Glen, they're being very humble. We work with a lot of youth sport organizations, and Hockey Canada does it better than anyone we work with. Where I think personally there's an opportunity to make a change in youth sports is there's, every organization, every sport, every family, every community has an issue. They have a problem, they're looking to resolve it. And I think we often tackle these problems in isolation. And there's so many different stakeholders. I just feel so strongly that collaboration between all the different stakeholders will accelerate the improvements in youth sports.
All right. One more opportunity from the floor for questions before we end this portion of the schedule. We're all good? Okay. So let's thank Nate, Kate Pace, Lindsey, Glen McCurdie, and Angela Goran. In terms of scheduling.